Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 3 of our 6-part Kaladesh full set review. Today we're going to look at all of the black cards in the set and a few of the multicolor cards. Now, if you've been watching the channel over the last couple days, you know we've looked at all the white cards, all the blue cards. Tomorrow we'll be back with the red, and then the next day green, and the next day colorless and lands. Now, quickly before we get started, if you check out the description box below, there's a link to our Amazon affiliate store, and if you make any purchases through any of those links, a small percentage will come back to support the channel. So as always, I thank you in advance for looking at those, and also I quickly want to thank the patrons on Patreon that help make all of these videos possible. Now, having said that, before we get into the individual cards, let's talk about black in general as a color. Now, I mentioned this in the other two videos, so I'll try to keep it brief, but overall, Kaladesh gives you a lot of options in draft. It doesn't lock you into a certain two-color pair or a certain mechanic. The big mechanics of this set really run through multiple colors and even into colorless cards, so it makes your draft a little more nimble, a little more flexible, and it really means any color combination I think has a chance of winning a draft pod. So if we're talking about black specifically, one option is to go Orzhov. Orzhov is all about pairing up white's flicker abilities and small creatures with black's fabricate abilities, and when you make a lot of servo tokens, black also can go ahead and sacrifice those tokens to get extra value from some of those cards that get benefits from sacrificing artifacts. Also, if you have to sacrifice real artifacts, in that case, then they go to the graveyard, there are a lot of ways to bring them back to your hand too in that color combination. If you go Dimir, for example, it's very similar in a lot of ways, but instead of flicker effects, blue is going to use bounce effects to let you replay cards with fabricate and with enters the battlefield effects. Also has some strong counter magic to back you up there. If you go Golgari, Golgari is actually a pretty fun combination, I think. It's taking energy and converting it to counters in size, and that's going to help not only your black creatures but your green creatures get bigger and can be a little more aggressive. But also, you'll see at the end of this video there's a Golgari card that actually rewards you for having counters on your creatures. And finally, if you go Rakdos, Rakdos is really super aggressive again. In Shadows over Innistrad block, Rakdos got a little bit bigger and slowed down a little bit. It's going faster again now. Maybe not quite as fast as it was back in like Tarkir, in Dragons of Tarkir, but it is speeding up again. You're going to see that aggressive side of Rakdos again, and there's a lot of cards that are just like the small beaters that come in, and cards that start off small and can actually grow if you sacrifice artifacts and things of that nature. So, having said that, let's get into the individual cards. We're going to start off with Etherborn Marauder. This card's an interesting limited card. First off, I'm going to say it's a good limited card. I mean, I don't mind paying for a 2/2 flyer with lifelink. It feels a tad expensive, but the lifelink can be very swingy, and if you can get across with even 2 or 4 damage with this thing and gain 2 or 4 life, that can make a pretty decent difference. Now, its ability is a little tricky. You have to be really thoughtful about it, because here's the deal. There's going to be times where you may want to move some of your +1/+1 counters to this creature. There's going to be times you don't want to do that, right? In a vacuum, it's better to spread out your power and toughness. It's just going to protect it a little better, because if you move a bunch of counters to this creature and it gets destroyed, then you lost more power and toughness and more board presence, right? So you don't always want to do that, but there are times where you need to defend yourself. Maybe there's a big flyer that's in the sky coming at you. Maybe you need the lifelink to try to come back, so you're going to have to put some amount of counters on this thing. Now, this card's going to work best in the Golgari build that plays with counters a little more than probably the other colors, but like I said, regardless, it's still a fine limited card even if you don't go super deep with it. Ambitious Etherborn. Limited beater. I don't have a whole lot to say about this one. It's a 5/4 for 5 if you take the counter. If you don't, it's a 4/3 with a servo token. Both can be good, depends on the situation. I like the flexibility. Decent 5-drop. It's going to be a nice body on the battlefield for you if nothing else. Demon of Dark Scheme. So here's our first mythic of the day. Now, the first thing I want to point out about this card is it only costs 6, however 3 of it is on color with black, so it's going to be difficult to cast at times, but in limited I think you're going to be okay as long as your deck's like a 2-color deck. I mean, if you're half black and half another color, then you should be fine. I don't think you'll have a lot of issues casting this most of the time as long as you're getting your land drops, right? Once you get the mana to do this, this is amazing. I mean, 5/5 flyer, it hits everything else with -2/-2, And for every creature that dies, including those or anything from this point forward, as long as it stays alive, you get an energy counter. And then later, you get to start picking graveyards to take creatures back or steal creatures. So in other words, if I pay a black and 2 and 4 energy, I get to go in any graveyard, take a creature, put it into play under my control, comes into play tapped, but that's fine. And that way I can get back maybe either some of my creatures I lost when this thing came back into play, or I can get just the best thing that's out there. Now, this will shine most in Commander, because first off, 6 mana, 3 on color is not really a big deal to cast in Commander. And in Commander, you have just more targets, you have more graveyards, you have more creatures in the graveyards to choose from. You just have a lot more going on, so this card just becomes even better. I think it's very good in Limited, very good in Commander as well. I think it's going to be a little too difficult to be able to cast in Standard with the consistency you want, and the ability can also have a little bit of high variance to it. So I don't see it getting there, but it definitely has its homes. Done to Operative. This is a phenomenal 2-drop, and if you've been listening to my videos this week, you know I love 2-drops in limited games, right? Like, it's the most important part of your deck. It's the meat and potatoes, and if you get yourself a 2/2 for 2 on its own, that's very playable. And now you have a chance that if you have an artifact, which shouldn't be super hard to do, especially in black where you have fabricate cards, this thing becomes a 3/2 with Death Touch. Yeah, sign me up. That's phenomenal. It's a common. You could get multiples in your deck. You'd be very happy to play multiples of this. Fantastic card for Limited. Diabolic Tutor. Okay, maybe my favorite art of the set, perhaps. I saw this art early on, and I can't believe it didn't occur to me that this was going to be on Diabolic Tutor. Now, if you're familiar with the previous printings of this card, they have a skeleton like whispering to this guy, and the guy's looking real like kind of evil and awkward, similar to the face Chandra's making there. And they took that scene and inserted Liliana and Chandra. The flavor text is awesome, and I just love when they kind of do these art swipes. They don't do it very often. You used to see it sometimes in like the unsets, but I wish they would do more of that, like either when they reprint the card, or even if they just do a callback to an older card, to a piece of art on an older card. I think that's really cool. Like, I always like cover swipes in comic books and stuff, so I think this is really awesome. So let's talk about the card now, and it's a good card in Limited. I mean, tutors are always good. Here's the thing with Diabolic Tutor. There's been times it's seen some Standard play in certain formats. I don't know if we'll get there this time or not, if it's fast enough or not. But what's nice about this card is you search up what you need when you need it. So in Limited, I really need a removal spell. Okay, you can at least go and get it with this card. I really need a creature. You can go get it. I really want my bomb to close out the game. You can go get it. So it adds a level of flexibility. I mean, costing 4 mana means you're probably just going to get the card and you'll probably cast it the following turn. So it's not like a demonic tutor or anything like that, which only costs 2, but that of course is way too pushed. This is a more balanced tutor, and still fantastic. Still wouldn't hesitate to play it in Limited at all. And like I said, it could make an appearance here and there in Standard. We'll have to watch for that, but if nothing else, definitely cool in Limited. Die Young. Of course, there's another card called Live Fast that we're going to look at in a few minutes. This is good removal for Limited. I don't think it's going to cross over into Standard, though, just because there's a lot of really high-quality removal right now. You have cards like Murder and stuff in the format, so I don't think it needs this. I mean, this is sorcery speed. It's also dependent on energy counters, and you do get 2 counters when you play this card, so at the very least you can get rid of a 2 toughness creature just right off the bat with this. But if you have more energy in reserve, it can do a lot more. So this card's going to play a little bit better probably if you're playing black-blue, black-red, or black-green, because those really are the more strong energy colors. But even if you're not, I mean, this can still do work for you in Limited. I'd be happy to get rid of a 2 toughness creature with this if nothing else, and if I get more out of it, great, even better. Docar Scavenger. I'm not a big fan of this one. Here's my issue with it. Now, first off, it kind of does what black wants to do. I mean, black's sacrificing creatures, they're sacrificing artifacts, so to be able to take one of those back from your graveyard, put it on top of your library, there is a little bit of value to be had there. But here's the deal. A lot of times you may not even want to do that. And you don't have to do it with the card, but if you're not doing that, what are you really getting here? A 4/6 for 6, no evasion, no special abilities. That's kind of painful. And there are times where, yeah, you have something good in your graveyard and you'll be like, okay, I'll draw it next turn. Other times you might not have a target for this, or simply the things in your graveyard aren't better than what you have the potential of drawing from the top of your deck. Maybe you're looking for an answer like a removal spell, or you're looking for your bomb to come up. No reason to slow yourself down by a draw, right? So yeah, I'm probably going to skip this one. Just not very exciting, especially for 6 mana. It just seems really expensive. Eliminate the competition. This is cool and limited, especially if you have a lot of servo tokens. You're all in on Fabricate. Again, this might work better in the Orzhov or the Dimir decks, where you're able to exploit those entrance to battlefield effects a little more. But this can really decimate your opponent's board state, no doubt. You get rid of a few servo tokens, get rid of their best stuff. That could be a beating. So again, I don't see this necessarily crossing over into standard. Again, there's other non-conditional removal spells out there, but good and limited for sure. Embrel Bruiser. Now this is a more aggressive card in black, and I kind of promised this at the beginning. A lot of the cards that go well with probably the Rakdos deck are going to look like this. Now, because it's meant to be a hyper aggressive card, it does come into play tapped. That's supposed to be its drawback, but you know what? For 2 mana, 3/1 with Menace, as long as I control an artifact, I'm happy to have this thing come into play tapped most of the time. I mean, there'll be times it's awkward where you really need a defender, sure. But most of the time, this thing just wants to get in the red zone anyway. Coming to play tapped isn't really going to make that much of a difference. You probably wouldn't have blocked with it anyway, right? So this is great. And like I said, it's not too hard to get an artifact, especially with Fabricate. So this most of the time will have Menace for you, I think. Essence Extraction, another decent removal spell for black and limited. This one costs 3. This time around, you do 3 damage to a creature. Now, it doesn't solve all your problems, obviously, but there's a lot of 3 toughness and less creatures that this will deal with. And you also get to gain a little life, which, you know, might matter in certain matchups if you're against a hyper-aggressive deck or something like that. Again, you have cards like Murder and stuff in Standard, so this doesn't really stand up to those in this current meta, but it's fine and limited. Fortuitous End. I actually like these cards. I really loved Macabre Waltz and Shadows over Innistrad. I found a ton of value with that card, and this card is very similar. If you have an artifact creature and a creature in your graveyard, you're able to bring them both back to your hand. So this allows you to just play a looser game where you're making more trades. And then when you pull the trigger on this, you're able to get those cards back, replay them, and you just get so much value out of those trades, and you start playing an attrition game. It can be very, very good. I'd actually be happy to run 2 of these, honestly, in my limited deck most of the time. Foundry Screecher, here's another hyper-aggressive limited card. I mean, we saw a 2-drop just a second ago that's a 3/1. Well, now we have a 3 casting cost 3/1 flyer. Now, again, you do have to control an artifact, but I don't think it's going to be too difficult. But regardless, whether it's a 2/1 or 3/1 flyer for 3, I'm pretty happy with it. It's going to get in there and do some damage. So, especially turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, when your opponent's going to be able to start blocking the ground creatures, this can perhaps still get in there for some damage. Fretwork Colony. This one's kind of funny to me. I want to like this card. Like, I feel like it's cool, but I don't really like this card at the end of the day. Here's my issue with it. It only costs 2, so that's a thing, but you only get a 1/1 for it. On your upkeep, it does become a 2/2, so in theory, you could attack in with a 2/2 on the next turn. That's not horrible. But my problem is it can't block at all, so you lose that flexibility. And just getting 1 counter on this every turn just feels a little bit slow. And considering you're losing a life a turn, this is not a big deal at first, but there's going to be times in the game where you're going to top deck this, and this will no longer be an option because your life level is too low or the board's too gummed up. And once the board gets gummed up, and you can't block with this thing, so how are you going to get rid of it? You're going to either find a way to sacrifice it or destroy it with one of your other cards. That's not going to feel good, and that's just if it gets out of control in a slow board state. This card can slowly just kind of take you out, and if it finally does get big enough to do something, your opponent could be holding on to a removal spell because they saw it coming for the last 8 turns, right? So I don't know, it just doesn't feel real good to me. I'd probably avoid this one. Ghanti, Lord of Luxury. Now this card I really like. It's a rare, of course. You won't see it as often, but a 2/3 Death Toucher for 4, I'm happy right there. Sign me up. On top of that, though, it's legendary. Keep that in mind for commander purposes. But the ability's really fun. I mean, you get to go 4 cards deep into your opponent's library, pick a card out, they don't get to see it, and then you have it set aside to play whenever you want to play it, basically. So you get to steal something out of their deck and just be like, I have something of yours, when am I going to use it on you? It just seems like it's really fun. It will be really good in limited. Like I said, the creature is good enough in limited on its own. The effect just makes it that much better, and then on top of that, commander, this will be amazing fun. I mean, you have more targets to choose and more decks, right? And also you have a better chance of hitting some big absurd spell because you're playing commander. Could be a lot of fun. Harsh Scrutiny. So this is kind of like the duress effect for the set, and it's fine. I mean, I think they just didn't want you to be able to take artifacts out of your opponent's hands with this card, so instead they just made it strictly creatures. You can still hit artifact creatures though, so that's a thing, keep that in mind. And yeah, you get to kind of look at their hand and pick through it. You also get to scry one, all for 1 mana. It's actually pretty good. So this card's just fine. I think it could potentially see some play in standard. I mean, duress always does. This card maybe is a little more narrow, but if you don't have duress available, you have this. It might just be good enough anyway. And if you're playing limited, it's good in some limited decks. If you're hyper aggressive, you probably skip this because you'd rather just be playing creatures and building up 2 ways to make your creatures bigger and more efficient. But if you're playing a slower, more controlling game, then this is good for you. Lawless Broker, another good 3-drop. I mean, a 3/2, and when it dies, something gets a counter. That's pretty decent. Again, it kind of wants to play with Golgari probably more than anything since it's in the counter business, but it's good for any build, I think. Live Fast. Okay, so this is not quite as good as Read the Bones, which is going to be rotating out, but it's still pretty good. I mean, draw 2 cards, lose 2 life. This time you get 2 energy. I mean, the big difference is Read the Bones lets you scry 2 instead of the 2 energy. Scry 2 and then draw 2 is actually a really big deal. Like, that's awesome. And there's a blue card that does that currently that we saw yesterday. But this is fine and limited, though, if nothing else. It's not going to have the impact Read the Bones had, like on standard, I don't think, or anything like that. But this is a very playable limited card. Lost Legacy. Okay, first off, I really like the art on this, and you can see it in the background here. I just chose it because it was very striking, and I like the idea that, I mean, there's kind of a dark story behind it, and it's also kind of falling apart, and it's kind of in disrepair, but at the same time, it's just really bright with the sun kind of shining in and stuff, and I kind of like that design on black cards. I'm kind of sick of seeing all grays and blacks and blues on my black cards, I guess, so this is really cool. Let's talk about the card itself now. Here's the deal. It's very similar in some ways to Cranial Extraction. However, it's much more narrow than Cranial. It's 1 less mana for converted mana cost, but you can't touch artifacts, and that's a big drawback. Also, if the card you choose is stripped out of your opponent's hand, they get to replace it by drawing a card. So, okay, that's not the worst thing in the world maybe, but the non-artifact thing is kind of painful, I think. So, here's the thing with this card. In a world where we have Cranial Extraction and Modern and so on and so forth, it's probably not going to replace that card there. In Limited, this card could be a sideboard card if your opponent has some sort of big bomb, like maybe they played that demon we looked at a few moments ago in Game 1, and you want to try to preempt that, then okay, you can board this in and try to stop that before it happens. That's probably not a bad plan. Standard, it could be used out of standard sideboards. I mean, let's look at decks that are running like Emrakul's and stuff, right? It'd be kind of nice to strip those type of win conditions out of some of those decks. Could really do some damage. So I could see that happening as long as there is a viable black deck that can swing this for 2 black mana relatively consistently out of their sideboard. Could see it there. The other thing you want to take into account, a lot of folks have been thinking, well, maybe you can kind of flip reverse this and play it on yourself. And there's been similar tricks like that in the past, but you basically take a card like Shadowborn Apostle, for example, and you fill your deck with those because you can have more than 4 of those in your deck. And then what you do is you play this on yourself, you get rid of all those Shadowborn Apostles, and if you had any in your hand, you get to draw a card, so that's pretty cool. And you draw down to basically your win condition or whatever you want to draw down to. So it kind of acts a little bit like Doomsday does in the other older Eternal formats. Again, those formats don't need this card because they have Doomsday. The thing that's awkward about that, though, is then you kind of get down to the last few cards, but your land kind of gets in the way, unless you solve for that. And you will have to solve through that through playing like very few lands, maybe more spells that give you mana, stuff like that. to kind of get around that. It just starts to feel a little awkward and hard to pull off. So it is one of those kind of fun ideas, and maybe you could get it to pan out or try to build something around this. But I think it's one of those fun ideas, so you can just try to figure out how to build around. Could be a fun thing to try to brew. I don't know how viable it could be, but I just want to throw it out there. Someone might think of something. Make obsolete. This is a sideboard card for limited, for when you're up against some more hyper aggressive decks. You're getting hit by the 2-1s and 3-1s. Game 2, you side this in and try to mitigate that. Marionette Master. I talked a little bit about this the other day when it was previewed, and it does have an ability that if you are able to cycle it or get something caught in an endless loop, that it could be very damaging. Problem is, there's just better, more efficient ways to do that, and this card costs 6. So yeah, I don't see it doing much outside of limited, but I think it's a fine limited 6-drop. Like, I wouldn't mind playing this in my 6th spot in a deck. You get a 1/3 and 3 tokens, or you get yourself a 4/6. Yeah, I'm okay with that, especially considering there's so many things I can do with these servo tokens. A lot of places to sacrifice them to and stuff. So yeah, I think this is a fine card. Malphas Squad. This is a 4-drop now that really continues on that curve of aggressiveness. So you saw some good 2-drops, some good 3-drops, and here's the 4-drop. You get yourself a 3/1 menace and a token, or a 4/2 menace. That's pretty good for 4 mana, especially if you're on the offensive. That menace will be important again once you get to turn 4, turn 5. Could help this thing get across for some more damage. But even if it doesn't, if it's a 4/2, it can still trade for something relatively significant. Midnight Oil. Okay, here's another one of those crazy cards that you kind of have to take a minute to wrap your head around. So here's the thing with this card. I would not mind playing this on myself, like normal, because I think the card advantage is great here. I mean, every turn I'm going to draw 2 cards. Here's the deal. You can't really play it to turn 4 typically, right? At the earliest. Now, at turn 4, you have hopefully 4 lands out at this point, maybe even a 5th if you ramped or something. And you start off with 7 counters on this card. Now, every turn you're going to lose 2 counters, and that will now be your maximum hand size. So it's only going to take a few turns before your maximum hand size becomes 0. Now, every time you discard a card too, you also lose a life. So you keep that in mind. Now, turn 4, this thing's at 7. All right, it starts to tick down. It doesn't tick down to 0 for a couple more turns. At that point, how much of a issue is this lose 1 life? I really don't think it's going to be an issue. You're going to draw 2 cards, and one of 3 things will happen. You'll either draw 2 lands, you'll play 1, you'll take a point of damage. You'll draw a land and a spell, wonderful, you play both. Or you draw 2 spells, probably most of the time at this point in the game you can play both, but if you can only play 1, you get to choose the best one, and you play the best one. The other one goes to your graveyard so you can recur it later or whatever. And yes, you are taking a little bit of damage, but you're getting a crazy amount of card draw, and you're getting card selection when you don't officially get the card draw. So this feels really, really good to me. Yes, it can be a little dangerous, like a lot of black card draw spells, sure. But I do think most of the time this is going to pay off quite well for you. A lot of folks are looking at this card and thinking about, do you want to like harmless offering this? I think that would be honestly a benefit for your opponent most of the time, unless they were like, stuck on lands or something. But because they're just going to get that same card advantage I just described. It's going to be really, really good for them eventually. So yeah, I'd play this in limited on myself without a problem. I could potentially see this seeing standard play. I mean, I don't know what deck. I'm not really sure what deck exists that wants it. Maybe an aggressive deck. If the Rakdos deck can be lean enough, maybe this belongs in there. I just don't know if the Rakdos deck is going to be the standard aggressive deck, or if it's going to be like the Boros deck. The Boros deck feels maybe a little more streamlined at this point, but I haven't tested them yet or anything like that. So I guess we'll kind of wait and see. But potentially, it could get there. Mind Rot. This obviously is reprint. We've seen it many, many times before. It's good, again, if you're playing a slower, more methodical game. You want to strip your opponent's hand a little bit. If you're in the aggressive game on turn 3, you want to be playing a creature, not this. So it just depends on the deck. It's there if you need it. Morbid Curiosity. Now, I saw this played at PAX. LSV was playing with this card, and it was crazy good. Like, maybe it was just because LSV was playing with it. I don't know, but it just seemed like there was always something that you could sacrifice for like a ton of card draw on the table. It just was nuts, right? I really like this. It's sorcery speed, sure. It does cost 2 black. You are compromising your board state a little bit, but you're hopefully replacing that board state with lots of cards that you're going to be able to draw. So I can't wait to play with this. This looks super fun to me. I think it's going to be a good limited card. You're going to have things on the battlefield that at some point become obsolete, and this card's here to just basically recycle them for you. I mean, that's pretty awesome. I think it's good enough to see standard play. From what I saw, it could actually see play in other formats as well, maybe modern or something. It just seemed really strong. Night Market Lookout. I'm not super excited about this one. This is a 1-drop that just doesn't feel like it's doing enough for me. It's a 1/1, and sure, whenever it gets tapped for whatever reason, pings every opponent, you gain a life. It's just not enough for me, quite honestly. I'd just rather have another card in my deck. Noxious Gearhulk. Here's the second mythic of the day, and yes, it's a Gearhulk, and it's amazing. Imagine that. They're all amazing. This one, 6 mana, but you're getting yourself a 5/4 menace, and you get to destroy a creature, and you even gain some life. So, you know, what else could you ask for? I don't know what else to say about these Gearhulks. They're just beasts. Phenomenal card and limited if you're lucky enough to get it. This will see standard play, I'm sure. And I don't know, some of these will cross over into modern too. I'm not sure which ones. I don't know if they'll all be able to take the place of their Titan counterparts. Like, would you rather play this or Grave Titan? Probably Grave Titan. I don't know, but this is really good regardless, and it's going to see lots of play. Oval Chase Daredevil. I actually like this card a lot because it's a 4/2 for 4. They can potentially recur repeatedly. This goes out in the battlefield. It can trade for something rather sizable, and then when you play an artifact or maybe a fabricate card, you go ahead and get this back to your hand. You just do it all over again, and it can keep repeating. That's really tough for your opponent to deal with over time if they can't find a way to like exile it or something like that. But come to think of it, I don't know if there's any exile effects in this set. Not that I can think of off the top of my head anyway. So yeah, your opponent's going to have to deal with this card, and it becomes very annoying very fast. Very strong limited card, I think. Ricotta Club Security. Now this is just kind of a vanilla beater. I mean, it's a 4-drop. You're not always going to have room for this, but if you need a 4-drop to even out your curve, that's what they're there for. If you don't, you'll just skip it. Rush of Vitality. This is okay. Here's the thing, there's not a lot of options for removal in this set. I mean, even in black, removal is very conditional. There's a few cards, there's a couple coming up still that we haven't looked at yet, but there's not a lot to choose from, especially when you're looking at the common or even uncommon level at times. So this card becomes a little bit better because this combat trick might have to substitute for removal. So keep that in mind depending on your deck. If you're looking for removal and you just don't have it, you could run 1 or 2 of these. It makes you do a little more work, but hopefully if things work out, the results will be the same. Subtle Strike. This is okay. This is another card that I'd probably sideboard in more than anything. If my opponent's playing a lot of small creatures again, I would bring this in. I mean, Golgari decks might like the extra counter. There are cards that will play well with that. So if I'm in Golgari and I already have a combo for that, maybe I run it main deck, but I think most of the time I just side it in. Syndicate Trafficker. Here's another one of those super aggressive 2-drops, a 3/1 for 2, and on top of that, it can get bigger and can even gain indestructible till end of turn. All you have to do is pay a mana and sacrifice an artifact. So again, here's another outlet for those servo tokens. Another reason enter the battlefield effects that can be used multiple times, like Fabricate, can be really, really good. It can just power out a card like this. And you know what? Even if this thing just stays a 3/1 and I drop it on turn 2, I might get across with some damage. It will trade very favorably for me. Really good limited card. It's a rare. You're not going to see it a whole lot, but when you get it, it might press you to go for the Rakdos deck or a real hyper-aggressive style deck. Thriving Rats. It's a 2-drop. Sometimes you need 2-drops. It's okay. It's not the best 2-drop. I mean, we've seen some awesome ones, obviously. So this one feels a little lacking compared to the others, but at the same time, when you need a 2-drop to even out your curve, it's just fine. It will be okay for you. Tidy Conclusion. Here's the removal spell for black, a common that is unconditional. It is a little costly. It's going to cost you 5, which you might not be used to since we've been playing in the Shadows over Innistrad world for a while. But you know what? This is pretty much as good as it gets here. So you'll play these and you'll smile and you'll use them because you might not have a whole lot of other options. The gain life is not completely irrelevant. If you have artifacts in play or servo tokens or thopter tokens or something, that can actually start to be a fair amount of life, especially if you run a couple of these in your deck. Also, again, it's going to help you against the hyper aggressive build. Underhanded Designs. Here's another removal spell. Now this one's going to make you jump through a few more hoops, but what I like about this one is I can put it on the battlefield and just use it as a threat at times, so it makes my opponent really have to think about like when they're going to play their creatures, how they're going to play their creatures, what order. They're not going to want to throw their best thing out there just for me to destroy it. Again, I do have to have 2 or more artifacts for that ability to work. However, there's also another ability attached to this that will ping an opponent and let you gain some life, so that could be relevant too if it sits on the battlefield long enough. Weapon Craft Enthusiast, another Fabricate card. This one costs 3, and yeah, 2/3 for 3, that's good for limited, and I even have the ability to split that power and toughness up and go wide, or use those to sacrifice servo tokens to other cards. Yeah, this is pretty good. Alright, let's move on to the lone Rakdos card of the day. It's Unlicensed Disintegration. Now, here's some serious removal. This is no plain removal. Destroy target creature, also potentially can damage the opponent for 3. Cost 3, instant speed. There you go. That's what we're looking for. Now, in this set, they're making us pay 2 colors for it, but it's very, very good. Definitely worth splashing black or red for if I'm only in one of those colors. The card is that strong. It's an uncommon, so you'll see a few of these going around. They will show up at the table. You will have to be aware of this and play around this a little bit, right? Having said that, I think this card potentially could see some standard play. It is competing against Murder. However, if a Rakdos deck emerges out there, this might be a better option, because many times when you play a 2-color deck, it's easier to play a spell like this than it is a double-color spell. It just depends on the way your deck's built and what your ratios are and stuff. So at times this could actually be better than Murder, and it does have some upside as well. I think that's important to note too. And finally, our last card of the day, it's the lone Golgari card. It's Hazardous Conditions. So if you're in Golgari colors and you're playing around with some of those counter mechanics in green that you'll see, this is a nice complement to those, especially if your opponent's playing small creatures. However, if your opponent's playing larger creatures, or if they happen to be using a lot of counters too, this can backfire on you a little bit. So it might be a sideboard card, but this does work against a lot of the different mechanics in the set. It really messes up the go wide strategies, it really messes up the hyper aggressive decks. So there's going to be times where this will come out of the sideboard and do a lot of work for you. Alright, having said that, those are the cards for today. Got through all the cards from Black, Golgari, and Rakdos. Tomorrow we'll be back with all of the red cards and a few more multicolor cards. And like I said, we'll go the next 2 days after that and wrap up the whole set. So as always, until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality content for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't yet had a chance to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.